Hi, I'm Roy Crown from Revelation Trust, and welcome to a new series of Gospel Entrepreneurs. In this podcast, I'll find out what makes Christian entrepreneurs stand out wherever they are, in church, business, or in the community. So enjoy. I'm thrilled to have my good friend Dave Smith with me today. I've known Dave for a number of years. We've done some projects together, Talking Jesus, the Wellbeing Journey. He's a senior pastor at Kingsgate Community Church. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. I'm sure you're going to be encouraged. He actually doesn't think he's a gospel entrepreneur, but what he's created out of nothing is amazing for the kingdom and for the gospel. So sit back and enjoy and be inspired. Dave, you were a son of a bishop, is that right? Was he a vicar and then became a bishop? Is that your kind of background?
Yes, so I grew up at Lee Abbey, which is a Christian community down in North Devon, and he was a chaplain there, then moved to become a rector of church in Chesham, and then ended up becoming a bishop of Hertford. Yeah, so a good Anglican heritage.
Which obviously made sense for you to go and plant a free church. But let's hear your story of how you came to faith. Was it as a result of being in a church where it was very religious, Dave? What's a little bit of your life?
Yeah, so I mean, strangely, in spite of all that, so growing up in a Christian community, I mean, I was very aware of, the Lord was real, but no sort of personal relationship with him at all. I hit teens, went into a massive teenage rebellion, rebelled against everything, God, family, school. My God and my idol was Manchester City, which, at the time was tough and now is no longer an idol, but is a nice hobby. So no, I didn't come to faith at all during my teens. I went to church, and then almost as soon as I had the choice not to go, I stopped going, which I think, many people do, sadly. So the real turning point was I went up to Oxford to study history. Some people in the Christian Union, unbeknownst to me, were praying for me. I was on like their kind of prayer list, and they invited me up to St Aldate's, which, large student church in the centre of Oxford. I think there's about 1,000 people in a service. It was incredible. Anyway, so I went into this service. Can't tell you anything about the service, the message, other than I remember in the final hymn, I must have known it from the past because I remember singing it. And then during that hymn, suddenly, for the first time in my life, I just felt overwhelmed by the presence of God. I was almost like trembling. I felt almost like a sense of incredible love just coming all over me. And it was almost as if the Lord was just calling me to himself. Being kind of quite stubborn and independent and not wanting to make lifestyle choices, I kind of knew it would be an all or nothing. So it took me another kind of 7-8 months before I finally said yes. I actually went back down to Lee Abbey to a student house party and then prayed a salvation prayer, invited the Lord into my life. And it really was an all or nothing deal. I remember almost like it was like I'd been driving the car of my life and, gave the keys to the Lord and said, right, Lord, now you take over. And it was just incredible. For me, it was a definite, not just an intellectual decision. It was a massive download from God. I felt a peace, a joy, a new sense of purpose. So that was at 19, and it changed absolutely everything.
And what a great spot. Lee Abbey, those of you who don't know, is a kind of retreat centre that runs camps and house party, amazing ministry, and continues to flourish today. And Dave, so then you've got a new direction, you've got a new sense of purpose. Obviously, you're going to become a vicar. That's the kind of trajectory there, isn't it, Dave?
Well, so I had a great 18 months at St Aldate's, and then all I can say is I just felt a prompting that I was to just explore, at least for me, what felt like a more radical journey. So I ended up in this crazy little house church on the outskirts of Oxford. I got baptized, and I think it just was necessary. I think it shook me free from a whole bunch of stuff. And so, in effect, I left the Anglican Church. I'm very grateful for my kind of charismatic Anglican roots, as is my wife, who got saved on an early Alpha course at HTB. So ended up there, continued doing my studies, ended up doing a doctorate on George Whitefield. So I had kind of 3 years full-time and then 4 years part-time, sort of swimming in the revival river of the 18th century, which is incredible.
Because they were very entrepreneurial, weren't they? The Wesleys and the Whitefield, they saw the gospel as the redemption of the whole community and work, and just amazing, Dave. You've got any insights you want to give us from that little doctorate that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think Whitefield particularly, I mean, Wesley's more well known today because of Wesleyan Methodism. But Whitefield was the real entrepreneur in that sense. He was the forerunner. He was the one who went out preaching. So all the churches started filling up, and then he got excluded from the churches. And so he started preaching in the open air. Now we can say, well, what's the big deal? In that day, for an Anglican vicar or minister to get up and start preaching in the field was something only the radical dissenters did, the non-Anglicans. But he saw these massive, massive crowds. I mean, I think conservatively 30,000 in the open air. Some reports say 80,000. I think that was probably overcooked, but he preached without amplification to these tens of thousands of people, would position himself strategically so the wind would kind of catch his voice. I think there was something, a supernatural anointing must have been, but people could hear him perfectly at the back of the crowd. And that was just the natural kind of thing going on. But then the supernatural gift of evangelism and the revival of which he was a catalyst, both in England and in Scotland and in the American colonies, was just incredible.
Yeah, and they said that the unblushing lawlessness of that century was stemmed by two people, Wesley and Whitefield. They actually transformed a nation, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started with some individual conversions. Many, many leaders or future leaders, many Baptist leaders, many Congregationalist ministers got saved under Whitefield. So you had these whole kind of this new raft of new evangelical preachers and ministers getting into the churches. And then after Wesley and Whitefield, then you've got Wilberforce. And so what started as almost like a church move spread out into what was known as an awakening. And then it led almost into literally a reformation of the whole of society, and then missionary societies around the world.
And the great thing was it transformed businesses, factories, work, and it was very entrepreneurial. So you got a load of creative business. It was just, I think any evangelist like myself was always read those people. And it's brilliant communication, because he was brought up in a pub where he heard great stories, and he knew the gift of storytelling to engage an audience like that, didn't he?
Yeah, and the equivalent, I suppose, of their kind of Hollywood of the day came to hear Whitefield preach to find out how to communicate. So there was both an incredible heart for God, he was like on fire, and there was a natural gift, and the two came together.
So you studied that, and then, like an entrepreneur, this is why I think you are a gospel entrepreneur, you created something out of nothing. What was that you decided we're going to plant a church, we're going to just go and have a go?
So just for a very short time, leading this small church towards the end of my studies, and then the organization we were working with, a New Church Network, basically had a base over in the east, as in Huntingdon. And so talking to the leader said, would you come over and start a church somewhere nearer to Huntingdon? And the options were Cambridge. I absolutely love Cambridge. We now have a centre in Cambridge, but at the time I thought, didn't want to go back into that environment. Bedford was an option. But then just in conversation, it became clear that Peterborough was the place we were to go to. Nothing in the natural appealed about it at all. Unlike Oxford, had a premier university. Peterborough, is about to have a university, but one of the largest cities that hasn't had a university. It's completely flat. Oxford, you got the Cotswolds, and it was miles away from family and friends. And so we kind of were almost like parachuted into this city. I mean, at the time, I remember talking to Lord Mawhinney, great godly man. And he said when he first came to the city, which was before us, the Anglicans had nicknamed Peterborough the Dead Sea, as in it was so unchurched. So we came into this, very unchurched city, and we started with 9 people. We grew up to 15 after 18 months, and then had what I call a backdoor revival, which was gut-wrenching, and ended up with 6 of us. It was myself, my wife, our baby, or a young daughter, Emily, and 3 other people. And it was just a real kind of test of faith. I think the thing that kept us going, moving from Oxford to Peterborough, somebody had a prophetic word for us. And the word was think big or you'll limit me. That was it. Think big or you'll limit me. We started kind of dreaming of a large church. Didn't know what it would look like.
So you're thinking big and you're declining.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. We were praying for thousands and they were staying away in their thousands. You know, I look back at those first 4 years, there were still only 25 people. As I look back at that time, it was one of the toughest of our lives. And if you came to visit then, you'd have thought, hey, there's not a lot going on here. There's no evident fruit above ground. But I would describe that as a season of root work rather than fruit work. God was helping us put deep roots down in him, in his word, holding on to his promises when not a lot was happening, learning to be married, learning to bring up a young family, learning how to be generous with our finances when we didn't have much. All those kind of principles that now, years later, they're kind of second nature spiritually, were things that many of them we learned in those first sort of tough years.
So entrepreneurially, you believe in a desired future, you can see it, you've got faith, but 4 years battling away, that's quite a tough call to live in that environment without seeing quote unquote breakthrough or kind of move to another level. Dave, how did you live in that world?
So I had a teaching job. So we moved, I went straight into like a public school teaching history. So that was kind of it from a work point of view, but that was like 6 days a week. Did a Saturday morning. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like teachers are.
Exactly. Had to preach virtually every Sunday because there's no one else. Was finishing the thesis. And honestly, it just tested everything. But I think God used it. I remember at one time, almost a sense, I mean, there were plenty of bad things in my past, but I felt like almost for the first time in my life, I was trying something that mattered and was failing badly. And I remember sort of saying to the Lord, Lord, I resign. I can't build this church. I didn't hear an audible voice, but I sensed, a whisper in my spirit, almost like a smile from heaven. And I think what it did, it kind of dealt with a sort of sense of human self-sufficiency, any sense of, can I do this in my own strength? And so I think something of that humbling process, it just threw us on God. And then by the grace of God, God started, although there were only a few people, they were key people. They were people who came alongside, said, we believe in what God's doing here. We believe that there's going to be breakthrough. They started praying. We built friendships. We built a sense of community. And so, although it was tough, that there was a sense of the beginnings of something that kept us going. But honestly, I look back and I just think by the grace of God, we made it through. And then after 4 years, we still had only 25 people. And I felt the Lord saying, right, now it's time to resign from your teaching job and go full time. That was with 25 people. Now, from a entrepreneurial point of view, Roy, you'll reckon 25 people does not equal a salary. So in fact, from that, there would have been no money for salary with everything else we're trying to do with the church. I remember handing my notes in the January and felt no worry at all, no stress at all. I look back and I think that's where you get a gift of faith.
Karen might have been a little more stressful than you, Dave.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think she was. I think God gave us both. I mean, you'd have to ask her, but I'm pretty sure both of us just felt, okay, God's in this. And then we came to the summer and we went away for a week's holiday and came back. So, by the end of August, all the money would have run out from teaching.
Right.
And that Sunday we came back and 4 new families joined the church, decent income, whatever. Long story short, by September, the salary was there. And it was almost, I think, that we had to put our actions into our faith. And from that moment on, so we grew, almost doubled overnight. The following year, we nearly doubled, the year after that. And then almost for about a 15-year run, we were just growing 15, 20% every year, blessing and favor. But I think it took that step of faith to actually, it's like, I don't know how these things work, but God in his grace.
And there's no escape from that, is there? Because, without faith, it's impossible. I mean, not just a good idea, it's impossible to please God. So I think,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, but then obviously, if you go and see Kingsgate now, there's a massive auditorium. You've been very entrepreneurial in the development of the ministry that you've done. So obviously God's favor, people are coming to faith, you're growing. but you're continually looking at the new thing and thinking, well, what's next? Even now you're thinking, what's next? So you've kept that kind of spirit in you. So tell us a little bit about, we're getting a bit big, should we get our own building? What was that like as a pastor? Because I'm sure many pastors listening, they've been in that space.
So it started out, we basically started moving from venue to venue in the city, you know, small community hall, bigger school, another school. And we ended up in the regional college, which was the largest sort of auditorium in the city, only seated about 400. And then we got to the point where we started outgrowing that. And we ended up in 3 services, you know, had to have like a video link out into the dining room. I mean, it was just mayhem. But actually, before we got to that stage, I think it's one of these things, how do you hear God? There was just this conviction that we would need a building. And so we started looking for a site. And we actually had a prophetic friend in Rachel Hickson who came in and just in the middle of a meeting just said, the Lord says it's time to buy land. And, you know, it was like all out of the blue and then moved on. It was kind of a confirmation for us. We're on the right track. Long story short, we ended up getting a 6-acre site. We prayed over it. We'd started raising money for it. We went to planning on it. And we went to the planning committee and lost it 4-3 on the vote. They said, no, wrong part of the city, you can't build. Now, thankfully, we never said to the congregation, thus saith the Lord, this is the site. It's hard to recover from that one. But nonetheless, there was such a sense of disappointment. I remember going out of the town hall, you know, almost like rebuking the devil. And I felt the Lord sort of saying, hold on, this is me. In other words, I felt the Lord saying, I'm overruling this. Now, when the Lord says I'm closing a door, it doesn't automatically, but I sensed, okay, well, then there must be another door. I remember having to get up to the church and say, look, we're not going to badmouth the city council. We want to honor authorities. We want to bless them and we want to trust God. 6 months later, we ended up, somebody found another site for us. This time it was 12.5 acres, so double the acreage. It was in a much better location. You've seen it, nice tree belt, very near the ring road and whatever. And we then went back to planning. This time we're doing lots of community work in the city. We got favor from the sitting MP, favor from the opposition candidate, massive favor from the CEO of the city council. And we went back to planning and this time we won it 9-0. So, oh, happy day. It's been such a blessing. And honestly, and this is where I slightly push back on the entrepreneurial thing. I had no business background at all. We'd never, ever done anything like this. Made so many mistakes on the building journey. But by the grace of God, we ended up with this incredible facility.
Well, a lot of entrepreneurs are not businessmen. They just see an idea.
Yeah.
They kind of trust God. And then what I think God does, Dave, and I'm sure this happened with you, is he brings people around you that can bring those other gifts and strengths to enable you to deliver on the vision, which is spiritual transformation of lives and community transformation with social enterprise. So it still takes the entrepreneur to see what's not there, but then you don't have all the business acumen to do it. And I think many entrepreneurs don't. They see an idea and they go with it. But I think it's true of social enterprise as well, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, the term I would use would be like visionary leadership. It's just probably playing the language here. But you're right. I think there's an absolute key is that thing of seeing something that is not just a figment of your imagination. It's not ego. It's just you sense God is saying something, you know, and we don't always get it 100% right. Sometimes, you know, I often say I'm good at seeing what we should do. I'm just not always good at the timing. And then you're right. I mean, definitely, you know some of our team. I mean, God has surrounded us and brought incredible people in with pastoral gifts, with managerial gifts, organizational gifts. Otherwise, you know, it's just thank God for team and the body of Christ.
Yeah, and it takes a leader to recognize that, and that you're the kind of orchestra director at the front conducting. But you can't do it all, and you've got to have people the ability to do that. That's what you do. But we just did a well-being journey, because even though you've achieved all this, Dave, there was a moment where you were thinking, I've got some internal struggles that Because I think when we see entrepreneurs, we often think, oh, they've got it all together, they're extremely successful, whatever. And that may be the case, but sometimes God is doing something in us. And the Wellbeing Journey came out of that. Give us a bit of that story, Dave.
Yeah, so it was 5 years ago, really. I was meeting with some friends in leadership, and they just happened to mention how they were navigating a massive leadership transition from one area of responsibility to another. And they talked about how they'd basically connected with a spiritual director and a psychologist. And the words of this friend was, without their help, we probably wouldn't have made it. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. We're not in crisis. I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't aware there was massive issues, but I thought prevention is better than cure. I've never had a spiritual director. We never had any counseling. Let me have a go and see what happens. And to my surprise, it began to open up some kind of inner issues that, I mean, I wasn't like in major sin. I wasn't depressed, but some areas of drivenness, aware that some of that was rooted in a fear of failure, and just felt the Lord started ministering a whole of his love. Perfect love casts out all fear, and learning to manage the tension between a God-given drive and, if you like, the shadow of that, a fleshly drivenness that isn't necessarily good for me or necessarily for people around me. And that's still, honestly, that's still a journey 5 years on. But really out of that came the sense of, okay, I'm learning to go deeper. I'm learning what it means to be genuine at peace, to be at rest. We've always been quite good at Sabbaths, but, take time out, getting better sleep. So looking at, and then out of that came, the basis for the Wellbeing Journey, which was this idea of almost like a wellbeing dashboard and the interrelationship between our physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, financial, and vocational well-being. And, asking ourselves the question, if this is your dashboard, are you on green, amber, or red? And realizing that for me, it was probably the emotional area that were the warning signs, and beginning to deal with that then helps me physically and vice versa and spiritually. So out of that came these resources and the partnership we've been involved in, which has been such a blessing. I'm so grateful to you and the team.
And if you want to find out more about that, it's wellbeingjourney.org. And Dave has written a book, God's Plan for Your Wellbeing, which is a part of that. And just some tools that have really been entrepreneurial from nothing. There was nothing there. And we then created this in pretty short time during COVID. And I think prophetically, again, seeing things that are not there, it was the right season, because everybody is now thinking about well-being and what that looks like. So again, that kind of gospel entrepreneur, seeing things that are not there, and God was doing something in Dave's life. We came alongside. So do check out those resources, and if they can bless you and serve you, we'd love you to do that. Dave, we're coming into land. Is there anything you'd want to say? People are listening. They may be thinking, am I a gospel entrepreneur? You church planted from nothing. Anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I think, often, you hear this thing, knowing God and knowing yourself, I think is absolutely key. So I think the first thing, whatever we're called to be, I think getting to know God better and knowing his love, and then getting to know ourselves. The worst thing any of us could try and do is try and be something we're not. But if there is that seed of visionary leadership, or in your language, gospel entrepreneurship, then I think you can trust that God is more committed to you and I fulfilling our potential than we are. And so my kind of confidence looking back over 3.5 decades is that as long as I keep following the Spirit, as long as I keep allowing him to do a deeper work, and as long as I don't let fear hold me back from moving forward, and I think there's a difference between faith and recklessness, but genuinely moving forward in faith, surrounding ourselves with others who are good checks and balances to any visionary leadership, then my prayer for anybody listening would be that, God would bless you and increase you and bless you to be a great blessing.
Amen. And I think sometimes, it's great, David, I think sometimes fear can cripple us.
Yeah.
But there's a healthy fear when you're kind of stepping out as well. So that kind of energizes. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we live with both, and I think it's the right kind of fear of God. God, you've got to come through. We're stepping out. We're going forward. Yeah. But a fear that won't do what you're gifted and what is just crippling and not what we're called to at all.
Yeah. And also, I think not to plateau. I mean, we're now thinking big again. I felt the Lord saying, just as we were beginning, hopefully, to come out of COVID, it's time to think big again. So, we're now believing for a building in Cambridge in the future, which is another whole deal. It'd have been very easy, just sit back, no risk. But actually felt like no. And again, I think that's a redemptive gift, because at the end of the day, we've got to keep thinking big. We've got to keep pushing forward back to Whitfield and Wesley and everything, because the bottom line is we want to see souls saved, lives transformed, not just now, but for all eternity. So I think I kind of try and partner with the Spirit in that, because I know ultimately it's not about me. It's not about my calling. It's about other people's lives being transformed.
And the reality is, the mission is we're not seeing the moves that we want to see, and we've got to keep stepping out. So, Dave, it's been an absolute joy, as always, to have this conversation. Thanks so much for joining me, and God bless you in all you're seeking to do.
Thanks, Roy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave, for joining me today. I told you you'd be inspired. He's got an amazing story, and obviously that encounter, and to grow a church in the first year from 10 down to 6 is always really interesting. And the fact that you've got to stick at things, it doesn't always happen in the first 6 months. So thanks for joining me today. I trust you've been inspired. I look forward to next week with another guest. But if you've enjoyed Gospel Entrepreneurs, I'd love you to leave a rating or a review if you can. Thank you for listening today. It's been great to share this time with you. Gospel Entrepreneurs is a UCB podcast in partnership with Revelation Trust. God bless you.